My girlfriend called me the family wallet during dinner. Everyone laughed, but nobody expected the surprise I had prepared. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. My name's Larry. I'm 35 years old, and I want to tell you how I ended up distancing myself from a family that over time I understood only saw me as a source of income. For a long time, I refused to accept it because I really loved my girlfriend, Deborah, and I believed that her family was simply going through a rough patch. However, over time, it became clear that they saw me as a convenient financial solution. And although I'm clear about it today, at that time I refused to see it because my love for her made me ignore obvious signs. To give some context, I don't come from a rich family, nor did I inherit anything. I started working at 18 with a small ice distribution business. At first, I only had 2 large freezers and an old van with which I delivered ice to restaurants and food stalls. It was a demanding business because it depended on punctuality, product preservation, logistics, and consistency. But with effort, I grew. Over the years, I hired employees, bought more refrigerated vehicles, got contracts with large stores, and today, I export industrial and bagged ice to other regions. I know it may sound like a simple business with no potential, but it's not. There's little competition, high demand, and customers can't afford to run out of product, so they pay well. Currently, I have more than 40 employees, several operating permits, my own trucks, and a solid customer base. I earn quite well, and I manage my finances with discipline. I always save, I don't make impulsive purchases, and I maintain economic reserves for emergencies. That mentality has helped me grow without going into debt. When I met Deborah, I was surprised that she never showed any interest in my money. She didn't ask how much I earned, she didn't make comments about my accounts, nor did she try to influence my economic decisions. She was affectionate, independent, hardworking, and had her own aspirations. She wasn't a materialistic or presumptuous woman. She worked hard, had a job, and although she didn't earn much, she was responsible. That's why I fell in love with her. I felt that she loved me for who I was, not for what I had. Her family was completely different. They weren't bad people, but they lived with the philosophy that money is to be spent, not saved. Her father had several businesses, but none stable, and he always ended up in debt or closing due to poor management. Her mother had a more relaxed, almost irresponsible attitude towards finances. She used to repeat that you only live once and you have to enjoy it. They were sociable, surrounded by friends and very good hosts, but they never had economic stability. I saw it as a different way of living, not as a threat. Everything changed when Deborah's father's business went bankrupt for good. It was an abrupt fall. He had taken out loans to expand, trusting in a tourist season that didn't work out and in commercial agreements that never materialized. The debts accumulated. The interest rates rose, and there came a point where they couldn't even pay for the basics. They were about to lose their house and faced possible lawsuits. Deborah told me the situation in tears, worried because her parents had no way to support themselves. She asked me to help them just while they recovered. I didn't want to get involved, not because I didn't care about them, but because I knew that mixing relationships and money can end badly. But Deborah had always been good to me. She never asked for anything outrageous, and she really seemed to be suffering. I agreed to help on the condition that it be in writing, not because I wanted to charge them interest or treat them like clients, but because I wanted to avoid misunderstandings. I prepared a signed blank promissory note to fill it with the corresponding amount when they could pay. I thought it was something reasonable and professional, but their reaction was completely different. Her mother took it as a personal offense, saying that she thought they were trying to take advantage of me. Her father got upset and assured me that I distrusted his word. Deborah was silent at first, but then she told me that it was an exaggeration, that it wasn't necessary, and that I should trust them. I tried to explain that it wasn't distrust, but a normal procedure when lending a significant sum. Still, I prefer to give in to avoid a deeper argument. I gave the promissory note to Deborah for her to keep. Weeks later, she casually confessed that she had destroyed it because she found it offensive to her family. We argued more seriously. This time I explained that it wasn't about the paper, but about responsibility and clarity. She replied that I worried too much about money and that I should be more human. I, being in love and wanting to avoid problems, decided to move on without insisting. Today I know that was a bad decision. I started depositing a monthly amount to support them. It covered rent, food, utilities, and some urgent debts. It was a considerable help, but nothing that would affect my economic stability. I thought it was temporary. However, a few months later, they started asking me for more money frequently. The justification was always that it wasn't enough for everything. I agreed because I believed they would soon get out of the crisis. The strange thing was that the expenses were not basic. I noticed they were buying expensive clothes, taking trips, dining in expensive restaurants, buying new appliances, and hiring unnecessary services. When I asked why they spent so much on secondary things instead of saving, Deborah answered me with annoyance. "Don't be cheap, you can afford it." That phrase left me cold. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the attitude. It seemed they no longer saw me as someone who helped, but as a permanent financial obligation. Every month they demanded more, they didn't ask for less. Their lifestyle became more luxurious than before the bankruptcy. It was absurd. Even if they had had a normal income, they couldn't sustain that pace. I began to suspect that they didn't want to recover. There were constant withdrawals, unexplained bank movements, duplicate purchases, and night expenses in expensive places. I accidentally saw a message between Deborah and her mother in which they talked about a trip they wanted to take when I made the deposit. It wasn't an emergency, it wasn't a need, it was an expectation. I didn't say anything at that moment because I wanted to understand before confronting, but the unease was already constant. I knew something was very wrong, and I felt that the situation was going to explode sooner or later. Everything exploded one night that, in theory, should have been a positive moment. Deborah's father had finally gotten a job after months of alleged recovery, and they organized a dinner to celebrate it. When Deborah told me, I felt relieved. I thought that they would finally be self-sufficient again, and that I could stop covering expenses that I should never have assumed. It was the first sign that all that sacrifice might have been worth it. However, before dinner, Deborah told me that I had to pay for it one last time. She said it with a light tone, as if it were just an unimportant detail. When I asked her why I had to cover it if her father already had a job, she replied that it was a symbolic way to close that cycle and thank them for their effort. She added that she didn't want to argue about something so minimal. I didn't insist because I didn't want to arrive with tension at a meal that was supposed to be pleasant. I accepted, although the situation made me uncomfortable. Upon arriving at the restaurant, I immediately noticed that it was not an intimate dinner. Not only were parents and siblings there were cousins, uncles, grandparents, in-laws, and some people I didn't even know. It was a large, expensive, and completely out of proportion gathering. They greeted me with enthusiasm, all smiling, toasting to new opportunities, and laughing among themselves. They seemed happy. I tried to enjoy the atmosphere, but I couldn't ignore the fact that everything was being paid for with my money once again. Even if it was the last time, it didn't feel like a closure, but like a burden. I sat next to Deborah and tried to stay calm. They ordered expensive dishes, expensive drinks, and additional desserts without even looking at the prices. It was evident that no one cared about the cost. I didn't expect gratitude, but without moderation, especially now that they were no longer in crisis. Instead, they seemed to enjoy it more because they weren't paying anything. At one point, one of Deborah's aunts approached me and said with an exaggerated smile, "What's wrong, Larry? Why such a serious face?" Enjoy this dinner that Deborah's parents lovingly prepared. Her comment left me disconcerted. Prepared. They didn't pay for anything. They didn't cook. They didn't organize the place. All they did was order and sit down. But I didn't answer because I didn't want to create tension. I simply nodded. Minutes later, Deborah's little cousin ran up and hugged me as if we were very close. Then he said with all naturalness, "Uncle Larry, give me money. Deborah said you would buy me a console." His tone was casual, as if it had already been decided. I thought he was joking, so I asked, "And why don't you ask your parents?" The boy went back to Deborah, and she, without even looking at me, replied, "Don't talk to him like that. You have plenty of money. Besides, I already promised him you'd buy it for him. Don't make me look bad." It was the first real stab of the night. It wasn't just that they asked me for money. It was that she assumed economic commitments on my behalf without consulting me, as if I were an extension of her wallet. I felt a mixture of annoyance and disappointment, but I held back. However, something inside me was already exhausted. For months, I had harbored discomfort, doubts, and accumulated anger, trying not to start conflicts and believing that eventually the situation would improve. It didn't improve. At that moment, the argument began. I told her in a low voice, trying not to attract attention, that she was taking advantage of me, that she had no right to commit me without asking. She responded in an annoyed tone, without lowering her voice. Several people stopped talking and began to listen. You always make a drama out of everything. It's just a console. You can pay for it without any problem, she said. I felt my patience completely breaking. I had made enormous sacrifices for her family, not out of obligation, but because I loved her. And she not only didn't value it, but she used it against me, as if my economic capacity morally obligated me to pay for whatever they wanted. I replied with a firm voice, without shouting. I'm not here to support your entire family. For months I've felt that you're just using me. Every month you ask for more money. You spend on luxuries and you don't even try to save. I'm fed up. Everyone fell silent. Even the music in the place seemed lower. Deborah looked at me with disbelief, as if I were the one acting out of line. And then she stood up and said in a loud, almost theatrical voice, as if it were a joke that everyone should celebrate. Stop complaining and accept your role as the family wallet. There was an immediate wave of laughter. It wasn't uncomfortable laughter, it was genuine, loud, mocking laughter. Some even applauded. The mockery was direct and humiliating. It was the first time they'd call me that, but from the reaction, it wasn't an improvised nickname. It was probably something they had already said among themselves. One of the aunts added, "In fact, with your money, you've also been paying for my children's school fees." And she let out a laugh, as if it were something witty. The laughter increased. No one seemed to take the seriousness of what they were admitting seriously. Not only were they not grateful, but they felt entitled to use my resources as if they were for public access. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to process what I had just heard. Then I said, "Okay, then I'll stop paying. We'll see how you manage without my money." Deborah's father let out a loud laugh, as if I had said something funny. "I just closed the deal. We don't need you anymore. Forget about me paying you a single dollar of what you gave us. You're my daughter's boyfriend. It was your responsibility to help." Another round of laughter, more mockery, more comments implying that I was exaggerating and that I should be proud to contribute. I looked at Deborah and waited for her to say something sensible. She didn't. She just said, "Don't be so sensitive. It's a joke. Stop behaving like a child. No one is forcing you." That was the exact moment when I understood that it wasn't a temporary streak, nor a misinterpretation, nor a family confusion. It was their way of seeing me. I had stopped being a partner and had become a provider, and not a respected one, but one they made fun of because they thought I would always say yes. I got up without saying another word. I didn't make a scene or return insults. I simply left. But as I walked to my car, I felt something different from the sadness that had accompanied me the last few months. I felt determination. I knew that this situation wouldn't stay like this. Not after everything I had given and the way they publicly made fun of me. Not after hearing that word repeated with laughter, as if I were an object. The family wallet. That night, I got home without saying a word. I didn't want to turn on the television or check my phone. I just took off my clothes, went to bed, and looked at the ceiling for several minutes, trying to process what had happened. It wasn't just the public humiliation, but the clarity with which I had understood that for months they had seen me as a source of money and nothing more. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I thought that all I needed was to rest. However, just as I was about to fall asleep, a notification arrived on my phone. I looked at the screen, recent charge on my credit card, the same approximate amount as the restaurant. I sat up with a jolt. They had used my card to pay for dinner. At that instant, I remembered something I had overlooked. Before dinner, Deborah asked me for my wallet to put my driver's license in so I wouldn't lose it. I, distracted and without malice, gave it to her. The card was still in her possession. I had a mixture of anger and disappointment, but not surprise. It was consistent with everything they had done lately. What did surprise me was my own lack of caution. Still, I didn't get too upset. I blocked the card from the banking app, took a deep breath, and thought in silence. This time they won't get away with it. And there I remembered something important, something that I had kept as a precaution at the time, almost out of instinct, and that now seemed like a key piece. The promissory note, not the one Deborah tore up in front of me, claiming it was offensive, but the real one, the original. That day, when she destroyed the document, I kept silent, not because I accepted her arguments, but because I had already foreseen that reaction and had prepared a duplicate to give them. The one she tore up was just a copy. The original had been kept from the beginning in my personal safe, protected and undamaged. I never expected to use it. Part of me really believed that they would try to pay me back eventually. Now I was glad I hadn't completely trusted them. The next day I woke up early, still tired but clearer mentally. Before making any legal move, I needed to know exactly how much money I had lent during those months. I opened my computer, reviewed bank statements, transfers, bank extracts, and receipts. I organized everything in a spreadsheet and added up every expense. School fees, temporary rent, utility payments, urgent purchases, trips, dinners, gift promised in my name, and monthly transfers. When I finished, I looked at the total calmly. $55,129. Not one more, not one less. It was a high figure, but real, documented, terrifying in retrospect, especially because a significant part had been spent on things that weren't even necessities. I wrote the figure on the promissory note. I didn't add interest or penalties, nor the extra payments that technically weren't included as loans, but as favors. I could have inflated the amount to double, and it would be hard to deny, but I wanted to be fair. That figure represented exactly what I had given them. Nothing more. Before leaving the house, I took a picture of the document with my phone. Then I put the promissory note in a rigid envelope and put it in the safe. I left in my van for Deborah's parents' house. When I arrived, the father opened the door with an annoyed expression, as if he were prepared for a confrontation. "What are you doing here? I thought we had already made everything clear last night," he said. I didn't respond to his attitude. I asked with a calm voice, "Will you return the money amicably?" He let out a laugh, but not of humor, but of mockery. "You're an idiot if you think we're going to pay you anything. You have no proof that you gave us money, and even if you did, we already said we won't give you anything. It was your responsibility to help. You didn't support us because you wanted to." Without speaking, I took out my phone, opened the photo of the promissory note, and put it in front of his face. "Here I have everything I need." The father took the cell phone with an incredulous expression, looked at it carefully, and muttered, "This is impossible. My daughter had this promissory note. We tore it up in front of you. You tore up a copy." I replied, "This is the original. Here is the real amount you owe me. Be grateful I didn't put more, because I could easily have put $100, 000. The father's face changed slowly. It went from mockery to confusion and then to anger. His wife approached and took the cell phone from my hands, reading it several times, as if she expected to find a legal trick visible to the naked eye. "We don't believe you," she said. "Perfect," I replied calmly. "Then, face the consequences. My lawyer will be in touch." I turned around and left without adding words. I didn't shout, I didn't threaten, I didn't insult. I just let them know that this was no longer personal, but legal. As I drove, I called my friend Leon, a lawyer specializing in civil litigation. I explained the situation. I sent him the receipts, screenshots, transfers, and a digital copy of the promissory note. He asked me to visit him that same day at his office. We spent hours preparing the lawsuit. Everything was clear, concrete, and demonstrable. The promissory note alone was enough, but I also had bank records and messages where they explicitly acknowledged having received money. The case was simple. When Deborah's parents were legally notified, they began to call me. First it was pleas and pretexts, then insults, then threats. They told me they would ruin my reputation, that they would go to the police, that they would invent accusations, that they would talk to the local press, that no one would believe me. I saved all the threats. I didn't respond. I just stored them in a backed-up folder in the cloud. My lawyer was satisfied. The threats made the case even stronger. When the trial began, they asked for the lawsuit to be dismissed, arguing that I had lent them money voluntarily and without the intention of recovering it. Then they alleged that the promissory note was false. Later they said that I had digitally manipulated the document. They changed their version several times, which damaged their credibility. I remained calm with physical and digital evidence, bank backups, account statements, and recordings of the subsequent threats. On the day of the final hearing, the judge was direct. He determined that the promissory note was valid, that there was sufficient evidence of the transfer of funds, and that the threats constituted an aggravating act. He not only ordered them to return the $5,129 to me, but also added financial compensation for damages, harassment, and malicious behavior. Deborah tried to talk to me after the hearing. I didn't answer her. I wasn't rude. I simply walked away. That day I left the courthouse with a strange feeling. Not joy, not euphoria, although people might think that's what I should feel. It was a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and emotional closure. I had recovered my dignity and had set boundaries that I should have established from the beginning. As I drove back home, I thought about how something that started as an act of support ended up being a nightmare. I thought about how many signs I overlooked, how many times I kept quiet to avoid conflicts, how many times I interpreted abuse as misunderstandings. But I also thought about something more important. It wasn't my obligation to support anyone, much less people who don't value the support they receive. I put the original promissory note in the car's glove compartment while I parked. Then I took it out, looked at it, and smiled for the first time in a long time, not because of the legal victory, but because I had finally stopped allowing others to decide how much my effort was worth. Update. Several months have passed since the trial, and it still seems strange to look back and realize everything I let slide for fear of ending a relationship that honestly no longer made me happy. Today, Deborah's parents send me the monthly payments agreed upon by the judge along with the compensation for the threats. It's not a small sum, but I'm not happy to receive it as if it were a personal triumph. It's simply money that's owed to me, money that I should never have given so blindly. Sometimes, when I see the transfers reflected in my account, I feel a mixture of relief and annoyance. Relief because justice is finally being done, because I wasn't left as a fool who gave money without demanding responsibility, and annoyance, because I know that all of this could have been avoided if I had set clear boundaries from the beginning and hadn't confused love with financial duty. I regret not having spoken up when the first signs appeared, for having ignored my own suspicions, for having allowed my fear of seeming selfish to make me act like someone incapable of defending their own resources. I haven't spoken to Deborah since the day of the trial. A mutual friend told me that she moved to another city and got a job at a department store. I don't wish her ill. I just hope she learns to stand on her own 2 feet and stops seeing people as economic solutions. I wish the same for her family, although I have no interest in having them near me again. For me, that chapter is closed. As for my personal life, I decided to take some time to be alone. I'm working on expanding the company and focusing on myself. For now, I have no intention of starting a relationship. I want to make sure that when I do, it's with someone who understands the concept of reciprocity and respect, not with someone who sees my effort as an inexhaustible source of benefits. There are days when I wonder if I was too harsh. I guess it's normal to feel that way after a complicated breakup. However, I also remember the way they laughed at me at that dinner and how they tried to minimize everything by blaming me for not understanding the jokes. That memory keeps me firm and reminds me that it was the right thing to do. If I've learned anything from all this, it's that loving doesn't mean sacrificing dignity. No matter how much money you have, how much you can give, or how many times you can rescue others, no one has the right to turn you into their permanent source of resources. And you also have to have the responsibility to take care of yourself. Now I'm at peace, more aware, more critical, and with the certainty that I will never again allow a relationship, no matter how much affection there is, to turn me into something I don't want to be. Today, I own my life again, and that's worth more than any sum of money I can collect.